Imagine a relationship that is formed in solitude and maintained through modest acts of kindness. A lady who is alone feeds a wolf that is starving every day. Aara lived a life of tranquil isolation in the barren and snow-covered slopes of the Carpathian Mountains. Her days were distinguished by the regular creaking of her old hut and the whisper of the wind through the ancient trees. On the other hand, during one particularly harsh winter, she was alone when she heard a frantic cry that led her to a feeble and famished wolf that was standing on the boundary of her property. Aara, motivated by a great sense of empathy, extended her hand to him and offered him food, a gesture that would transform into an improbable daily routine. In the early morning hours, when the snow was just beginning to melt, Aara would leave a little offering for the wolf that she referred to in a hushed voice as Shadow. Taking a cautious approach, he would approach the wild creature as if it were accepting an act of human kindness. The passage of time allowed for the development of a fragile trust between them, a silent companionship in the great desert. Every day, Aara was able to find comfort in her relationship with Shadow, who was a live presence that helped her feel less isolated. On the other hand, the harsh realities of living in the Carpathians seemed to be unrelenting. Finally, the day arrived when Shadow's footprints were no longer visible in the snow. Aara, whose heart was heavy, resumed her life of solitude, oblivious to the fact that her own time was also coming to an end. During a peaceful morning, the fire that was burning in the fireplace was extinguished, and the cottage remained motionless. The solitary woman had now vanished. What does a wild wolf, who is accustomed to the harsh laws of nature, do when the sole source of kindness in its harsh world disappears for good? This is the question that hangs heavy in the woods, and it is a question that leaves the silence haunting. You will be shocked by what it does after she has passed away. Which of his most basic instincts will motivate him? Do you think he will go back to the wild, forgetting the kind hand that kept him alive? Or will the connection that was formed during those peaceful mornings in the snow materialize in a manner that no one could ever have imagined? There is a striking demonstration of a link that transcended the bounds of species, and the solution is waiting for you in the silence that follows. It was a stark contrast to the peaceful sounds that Aara's daily existence consisted of, such as the creak of the rocking chair, the faint buzz of her knitting needles, and the crackle of the fire. The silence that descended upon Aara's home following her passing was profound. At this moment, the only thing that could be heard was the wind rustling through the eaves, carrying with it the hazy aroma of wood smoke and the lingering remembrance of her presence. There was a week that had passed. It was not brought to the attention of the small community that was located in the valley below Aara's secluded home that she had passed away. Over the course of her life, she had led a solitary existence, and her connections to the community had gradually diminished. There were no regular visits who checked on her. Her existence was a subtle thread that was woven into the fabric of the forest, and when it ultimately snapped, this thread was easily forgotten. In the forest, Shadow resumed his pattern, which consisted of going to the edge of the clearing every morning. This was a primal inclination that served him well. Keeping his acute senses at a heightened level, he waited for the familiar figure to make her appearance with her little offering. It was a reassuring presence that belied the growing emptiness that was there in the air around the home, and the perfume of her was still very strong. Over the course of the days that passed without Aara, Shadow's conduct underwent a subtle transformation. First, he was patient, but then his patience turned into a restless restlessness. While he was walking around the perimeter of the clearing, his quiet whimpers echoed the expanding emptiness that was occurring in his universe. As he moved closer to the cottage, his eyes, which were apprehensive, investigated the windows that were silent and the door that was closed. The stench of food, which was so familiar, had vanished, and in its place was the stale smell of a house that was not heated. Shadow started to leave the woods fully, his powerful legs taking him along the winding route towards the village. He was driven by a need that he was unable to comprehend. A creature of the wild, he went with extreme caution as he ventured into the territory of humans, a place that he had always intuitively avoided. His senses were assailed by the unusual odors of wood smoke, animals, and human activity, which created a cacophony that was very different from the peaceful seclusion of the forest. He was a grey shadow that moved stealthily through the early morning mist as he did his way around the perimeter of the settlement. Through the closed doors, he was able to get glimpses of human figures moving around within their dwellings, but the sounds of their voices were muffled completely. He sensed a tug, an instinct moving him in the direction of Aara's scent, which was the only recognizable odor that appeared to be absent from the universe at that moment. In the course of his quest, he arrived at the perimeter of the village cemetery, which was a small enclosure enclosed by a fence and used by the residents to bury their deceased. The harsh, metallic tang of winter air combined with the aroma of newly churned earth, while the air was crisp and cold. He approached with extreme caution, his senses on high alert. The foreign odors and the deep quiet of the place created a sensation of dread in him. With his nose to the ground, he strolled down the rows of basic wooden crosses and old stone monuments, looking for something. Furthermore, he discovered it, a small area of newly disturbed soil, a straightforward wooden marker with a name that he was unable to grasp, but whose aroma he was familiar with on a personal level. Aara. Shadow came to a halt, his muscular body remaining quiet. He lowered his head, his sensitive nose gently brushing against the frigid earth that was new to him. His voice let out a low, sorrowful howl, a sound that reverberated throughout the quiet graveyard. It was a primitive cry of mourning for the one and only kindness he had ever experienced in his life. The melancholy cry, a sound that told of a wild heart's agony, was heard by the peasants as they stirred in their homes. They were unable to comprehend its profundity, in addition to its connection to the solitary woman who resided on the hill, a woman whose uncomplicated act of kindness had established an unbreakable bonding relationship. On that chilly morning, the sorrowful howl that reverberated through the cemetery of the village shook the tranquil rhythm of life that prevailed in the valley itself. Residents of the village looked at each other with perplexed expressions as they pulled on their coats and peered out their windows. It was strange to see a wolf so close to the hamlet, and the unadulterated grief that could be heard in its howl was disconcerting. A village elder by the name of Old Man Tiberu was able to identify the sound. He was familiar with the sound, having heard it on multiple occasions over the course of the previous year. It was always carried on the wind from the direction of Aara's secluded cottage. Over the years, he had frequently pondered the elderly lady and the tales that occasionally spread across the community, which included suspicions that she had fed a wild animal. He disregarded them as nothing more than fantastic tales, the result of his feelings of loneliness and isolation. On the other hand, the evidence was now indisputable. There were a handful of the more courageous residents that made their way to the cemetery because they were curious and felt uneasy. They moved closer with caution, their gaze moving over the rows of graves as they approach. Within that location, they discovered Shadow, a giant grey wolf that was lying close to a newly dug plot with his head resting on the chilly ground. The anguish that could be seen in his eyes was real. It was a savage despair that went beyond the differences between animals. There were murmurings that drifted through the small group. A few of them experienced fear as their deeply embedded instincts alerted them to the threat posed by a wild predator. Due to the fact that they recognized the animal's true sorrow in its manner, other people experienced a peculiar sensation of pity. It was impossible for anyone to explain his presence there, as well as his apparent link to the just buried. The young martyr then spoke softly, her eyes widening with the unexpected realization that she had just gained. The wolf belongs to Aara. Once upon a time, I came across her leaving food at the edge of the forest. Although she never mentioned it, I was able to see him. Her statements shed a fresh perspective on the matter at hand. There was truth to the rumors. She had been providing sustenance to a wild wolf. Now, it appeared as though the wolf was lamenting her passing. There was a rapid distribution of the news about the wolf in the cemetery around the hamlet, which caused a divide in viewpoints. There were other people who asked that the animal be driven away because they were concerned about the safety of their animals. Those who were moved by the wolf's evident anguish appealed for sympathy among the audience. Elderly Tiberu, whose heart had been moved by the sight of the creature's anguish, cautioned the creature to be careful. He reminded them that he has not caused any harm to anyone. Perhaps that he was the only friend she had, she said. Shadow maintained his vigil beside Aara's tomb, remaining mute throughout the heated discussion. When he did so, he would occasionally raise his head, his eyes locked on the forests in the distance, and then he would lower it back down to the chilly ground. Not only did he not scavenge for food, but he also did not threaten anyone who came close to him. Because he had a wild heart that was attached to the memory of compassion, he simply stayed. A contemplative expression could be seen on the face of the village priest, Father Iowan, as he approached the grave. Aara, a quiet and solitary woman who had borne her own share of pain, was someone he had known for a considerable amount of time. During her final years, the idea that this wild creature might have provided her with some solace was a thought that resonated deeply with her. He spoke quietly, his words a loving benediction over the woman who had passed away, as well as her friend, who was heartbroken by her passing. The sight of the priest praying in silence while standing close to the wolf had a calming impact on the people who were more afraid of the animal. On the other hand, the officials from the neighboring town arrived with a different point of view after being informed of the mysterious presence of a wolf in the neighboring village. Just a dangerous wild animal that needed to be trapped and removed from the area was all that they saw. A fresh surge of tension was introduced into the situation as a result of their arrival, which posed a threat to the fragile serenity that had begun to establish around Aara's grave. The villagers, who were split between their dread and their growing comprehension of the wolf's anguish, watched with apprehension as the authorities approached Shadow, their goals being crystal evident. There was going to be a disturbance in the peaceful vigil, and the strength of the connection that existed between the solitary woman and the famished wolf was about to be put to the test in ways that no one could have anticipated. During the time when the authorities, consisting of 2 officers with severe expressions and armed with tranquilizer guns, were approaching Shadow at Aara's grave, the wolf displayed a deep growl in its breast. The voice was not one of hostility, rather, it was one of profound concern, a summons to refrain from disturbing his vigilance. All of the townspeople waited with bated breath, not knowing what they were going to see next. Old Man Tiberu moved forward at precisely the moment when the officers were getting ready to take aim, and his voice was remarkably firm. "Please wait," he murmured, putting his hand up. "He has not caused any harm. Do you not see any? His heart is broken." There was a momentary pause in the policeman's professional approach, which coincided with the raw emotion that emerged from the situation. The animal in question is a wild animal. It poses a threat to the community as a whole. "He has been here for days," Marta said, her voice beginning to shake slightly, yet resonating with the conviction that she was expressing. "He sits at her grave all day. It appears that he is sad." Fear and a growing awareness of the exceptional nature of the situation were the 2 sides of the argument that lingered in the air, and the villagers were stuck between the 2. On the other hand, the authorities do not appear to be affected by emotion. When a wild wolf was found in such close proximity to human settlement, it was required by protocol to be removed. During the process of re-evaluating their strategy, Shadow did something that was unexpected. He stood up from his position by the grave and, rather than running away into the woods, he turned his attention to the cops while maintaining a gaze that was fierce and steady. Then, he let out a succession of gentle, melodic howls, a sound that appeared to contain a profound sense of anguish in addition to something more, something eerily reminiscent of the past. This caused Old Man Tiberu's eyes to enlarge. That sound, which had been carried on the wind from Aara's hut, was something he had heard before. It was the wind whistling through the trees, or perhaps the distant call of another animal, that he had rejected as being the source of the sound. On the other hand, a startling insight came to him at this moment when he heard it so plainly and so close. He recalled the tales that Aara used to tell, which were fragments of her old life that she only occasionally divulged to others. Earlier, she had mentioned a man who had been a musician, and a man who was capable of eliciting the most exquisite tunes from his flute. He was the subject of her great affection. She was left with nothing but memories and a profound and unending sense of loss after he had passed away many years ago. After that, Tiberu recalled something else, which was something that Aara had only stated once, almost as an afterthought. A sequence of gentle, melodic whistles that sounded uncannily like the howling of a wolf were the distinctive method by which her beloved communicated with her from the woods that were located close to their residence. He had acquired the ability to imitate the sounds, which was a top-secret language that only they knew. As Tiberu's sight moved away from the wolf, it shifted to the freshly turned ground that was located at Aara's grave. His mind began to take hold of a terrifying idea, a thought that was so absurd and so ridiculous, but at the same time, it was somehow plausible. He saw Shadow for the very first time when he turned his head and gazed back at him. The insightful look in those wild eyes, the almost human-like sadness in his posture. Could it be that he is trying to tell us something? Is it possible that this wolf is nothing more than a wild animal that Aara has been feeding? With his speech filled with a newly discovered conviction, he turned his attention to the astonished people and the authorities who were hesitating. "Wait," he repeated, his voice shaking slightly as he spoke. "Listen to what he has to say. Pay close attention. The sound you hear is not simply the howl of a wolf." While he was trying to hear the melody and the melancholy scream, which was the echo of a love that had been lost a long time ago, he closed his eyes. A faint, eerie melody, a whisper of a lover's call carried on the wind of pain. He thought he could almost hear it in the wolf's melancholy cry. He thought he could nearly hear it. The startling reality started to become apparent. The connection that existed between Aara and the starving wolf might have been significantly more profound and remarkable than anyone could have ever imagined prior to this moment. The words of Tiberu lingered in the chilly air of the graveyard, and upon hearing them, there was a startled hush. Concern was momentarily overpowered by a sensation of complete and absolute incredulity among the people, who exchanged perplexed glances with one another. Despite the fact that their hands were still hovering near their tranquilizer rifles, the officials stared at the elderly guy with a mixture of doubt and fascination. "Just what are you trying to communicate, Tiberu?" The question was asked softly by Father Iowan, who had a concerned frown on his face. Could it be that the wolf is making a musical sound? Tiberu gave a slow nod, his eyes set on Shadow, who had been silent, his gaze now carefully focused on the elderly man. "Years ago," Tiberu continued, his voice hoarse with the effects of age and emotion, "Aara, she told me about her love. A person who plays music." It was possible for him to mimic the sounds of the forest. The sound was similar to the howl of a wolf, yet it was distinct. He had a specific cry for her, melodic tone. As he hesitated, his eyes wandered over the peasants who were still silent. "It has been decades since I last heard it. I believe I heard it once more in his cry, but just now I heard it again." A muttering could be heard across the throng. A small gasp came from Marta, and her hand quickly moved to her mouth. She recalled the rare instances in which she had witnessed Aara gazing into the forest with a wistful grin, as if she were listening to a melody that was somewhere in the distance. Could Shadow have been the culprit? It was clear that the authorities were not persuaded. "With all due respect, I must say that you are allowing your feelings to cloud your judgment, sir. This animal is out in the wild. The actions that we take cannot be based on mythology." But there was something in Tiberius' sincerity, as well as the apparent anguish that emanated from the wolf, that caused them to slow down. Despite their initial mistrust, they lowered their rifles somewhat as they observed the peculiar aura that prevailed at the site. As Father Iowan moved closer to Shadow, his speech became more soothing and in a peaceful tone. His eyes were filled with compassion as he stared at the wolf and said, "If what Tiberius says is true, then this creature's grief is even more profound than we imagined. It's possible that he was more than just a creature that Aara fed." Shadow stood up once more and gave out another soft roar, as if he had understood the priest's compassionate tone. During this particular instance, the people listened with a different ear, making a concerted effort to recognize the tune that Tiberu had mentioned. Some of them began to hear it, as the tragic cry reverberated across the cemetery. It was a nuanced cadence, a haunting rhythm that lay underlying the primordial sound, and it was a faint echo of something that one could describe as musical. The audience was overcome with a sense of shock and amazement. The truth of Aara's life, which consisted of her living alone, took on a new depth, A solitary woman feeding a stray animal was not the only thing that happened in this narrative. It was a story of an uncommon connection, one that appeared to be in opposition to the natural order. After hearing the peculiar tone of the wolf's cry and seeing the reaction of the locals, the authorities exhibited a level of hesitation that was even greater. Their black and white perspective on the situation started to become more hazy. Does this animal really have the capacity to experience such profound feelings and to have such a profound relationship to a human being? The presence of the village doctor, who had been called by a nearby resident who was concerned, added yet more dimension to the mystery that was developing. Doctor. Anya Petrova had known Aara for many years and had been treating her for a variety of ailments on occasion. Aara had mentioned a cherished pet that she had lost many years ago, a creature that she had described with an almost human level of care. She recalled Aara's words. It was never made clear to Aara what kind of pet it was. All she ever said was that the absence of it had created a significant vacuum in her life. All of a sudden, Anya had a thought that occurred to her as she looked at Shadow and then at the cemetery. Aara had been grieving the loss of her pet for a very long time, and this wolf, could it be that pet? Despite the fact that it appeared to be impossible, the intensity of the wolf's anguish and the melodic quality of its howls remained consistent with the concept of a buddy who was deeply treasured. Hans' stalemate had been reached in the situation that was taking place in the cemetery. Despite the fact that the authorities were unwilling to take action, the villagers were torn between dread and intrigue, and the truth about the connection between Aara and Shadow continued to be buried in a layer of inconceivable possibility. The following step would not only determine what would happen to the wolf that was in mourning, but it would also impact how the villagers would comprehend the unusual bond that had developed in their peaceful valley setting. During the time that the villagers and the authorities were trying to come to terms with the consequences of Tiberia's disclosure and the peculiar conduct of Shadow, a new source of concern appeared. In the nearby villages, there had been a string of homicides committed against cattle, and the news began to spread throughout the valley. The descriptions of the predator were consistent with those of a large grey wolf, and the bodies of sheep and goats had been discovered with their throats torn from their bodies. Fear, an instinct that had been temporarily repressed by the moving spectacle that had taken place in the graveyard, started to return among the people. Increasingly, the picture of a companion who was grieving was being gradually replaced by the image of a deadly predator, which was more recognizable and alarming. Fear and a lack of comprehension provided the impetus for the spread of rumors that Shadow was the one guilty for the murders. The farmers in the area, who were already having trouble making ends meet, asked that quick action be taken. They exerted pressure on the authorities to locate and exterminate the wolf, regardless of the fact that it appeared to be in mourning, or the likelihood that it had a special connection with Aara, who had passed away. Even though it was circumstantial, the evidence appeared to be damning. Shadow was the only wolf that was known to be in the area at the time of the attacks, including a large grey wolf that had been observed near the villages where the attacks had taken place. The authorities, who had hitherto been reluctant to take action based on sentiment, now found themselves under increasing pressure to respond to the mounting fear and economic worries of the community. Protocol and the protection of the general public required that they conduct an investigation into the likelihood that Shadow posed a threat. Due to this recent turn of events, a huge conundrum has arisen. In the event that Shadow was, in fact, responsible for the slaughter of cattle, the initial compassion of the people would swiftly transform into fury and dread, and the authorities would be left with no other option but to take decisive action. If, on the other hand, Shadow's presence in the hamlet was purely due to his sadness for Aara, then catching or harming him would be a tragic injustice, a cruel conclusion to a story that was extraordinary and profoundly moving. Old man Tiberu fiercely defended Shadow, stating that the wolf's kind demeanor in the graveyard was evidence of his non-aggressive attitude toward humans. Shadow was a well-liked member of the community. It was brought to his attention that Shadow had a great deal of opportunity to cause harm to the villagers who had approached him, yet he had not displayed any symptoms of aggression. Marta, too, defended Shadow by relating her experience of seeing Aara feed him and the wolf's reserved demeanor. Marta described how she witnessed both of these events, The creature that she had witnessed receiving food with such cautious caution was the one responsible for savage attacks on livestock, and she could not believe that it was guilty for those attacks. An alternative viewpoint was presented by Dr. Anya Petrova, who was intrigued by the prospect of a more profound connection existing between Aara and Shadow. She made the suggestion that the slaughter of animals could have been the result of another wolf, possibly one that was motivated by hunger and desperation due to the difficult period of winter. Since Shadow is fed on a consistent basis by Aara, it is possible that he does not have the same desire to hunt. In spite of these pleadings for comprehension, the authorities were subjected to increasing amounts of pressure. Farmers described their losses, their dread being evident, and their requests for action remaining unwavering throughout the presentation. The authorities were aware that they could not overlook the possible threat that Shadow posed to the community, and the circumstantial evidence suggested that Shadow was responsible for the crime. Her decision that was not easy to make had to be made. Not only were they unable to deny the strong evidence of Shadow's suffering and the extraordinary link that he appeared to have shared with Aara, but they were also unable to simply disregard the potential that Shadow may be harmful. A new element of tension and moral ambiguity was created by the subplot of the livestock killings. This new layer of tension and moral ambiguity threatened to overshadow the heartbreaking story of a lonely woman and her untamed companion, and it had the potential to lead to a terrible and improper conclusion. A cloud of gloom was cast over the community as a result of the allegations made against Shadow. Some of the villagers' initial feelings of compassion began to dissolve as fear and suspicion began to take hold. Even those individuals who had been moved by the wolf's evident anguish now looked at him with a watchful doubt in their eyes. Could it be that they were in error? Is it possible that this creature, which appears to be so compassionate while it is grieving, is also a brutal killer? In the course of his defense of Shadow, Old Man Tiberu noticed that he was becoming more and more alone. He was perceived as naive and out of touch with the harsh realities of the wild by the farmers, who were in danger of losing their livelihoods. A few of his friends who had known him for his whole life pushed him to exercise greater caution and reminded him of the inherent danger that wild animals provide. But Marta never wavered in her conviction that Shadow was innocent of the charges against him. Her observation of him from a distance lasted for a considerable amount of time, during which she took note of his unwavering presence at Aara's grave and his lack of violent behavior toward everyone who approached him. It was impossible for her to connect the image of the wistful wolf with the idea of a ferocious predator. Dr. Anya Petrova made the decision to adopt a more proactive approach because she was encouraged to do so by her scientific curiosity as well as by her developing feeling of empathy for Shadow. An expert on animals from a nearby university, Dr. Stefan Volkov, who is well known for his extensive work with wolves in the Carpathian region, was the person she turned to for assistance. She related the peculiar tale of Shadow and the recent killings of sheep in the hopes of receiving an impartial evaluation that she could provide. Due to the fact that the story piqued his interest, Dr. Volkov consented to travel to the community. Over the course of a day, he spent his time monitoring Shadow, his trained eyes carefully assessing the wolf's behavior, posture, and interactions with the environment. In addition to this, he investigated the locations where the livestock had been killed, searching for paw prints and other evidence. The initial evaluation that he made was cautious, despite the fact that Shadow's actions in the cemetery were undoubtedly peculiar. This did not completely eliminate the likelihood that he was the one responsible for the attacks. It is possible for even a generally non-aggressive animal to resort to desperate actions if it is starving, particularly during the brutal winter months. Dr. Volkov, on the other hand, pointed out several inconsistencies. In addition to the fact that Shadow's paw prints were slightly larger than those found at the kill locations, the pattern of the assaults indicated that the hunter had more significant experience. His plan was to put up non-lethal traps in the regions where the deaths had taken place, in the hopes of identifying the person who was responsible for the crimes. A glimmer of hope was presented in the form of this proposition, which provided an opportunity to ascertain the truth without quickly condemning Shadow. However, despite their continued anxiety, the people agreed to work together. It was easy to feel the emotional conflict that they were experiencing. Their long-standing apprehension of a wild predator was at odds with the overwhelming evidence of Shadow's suffering and the prospect of a special connection with Aara. During this time, Shadow resumed his vigil, seemingly oblivious to the mounting suspicion and terror that was surrounding him during this time. He would lie down by Alaara's grave, periodically lifting his head to give out a gentle, melancholy howl. This would serve as a continual reminder of the lost connection that had led him to the community in the first place. A tense and uncertain atmosphere was generated as a result of the complicated interplay of human anxiety, scientific investigation, and the raw feeling of a wild creature. Shadow's fate was hanging perilously in the balance as a result of this atmosphere. During the subsequent few days, when the traps were being set and monitored, it would be extremely important to determine whether or not the link that had been forged by compassion would be tragically shattered due to fear and misunderstanding. The traps that did not cause death were placed in the wooded areas that surrounded the nearby settlements, which were the locations where the cattle had been killed. The fate of Shadow was in the balance, and the villagers waited with a mixture of anxiety and hope until the outcome was determined. The days progressed into nights, and with each new dawn came a fresh feeling of anxiety throughout the entire process. The traps were methodically examined by Dr. Volkov every morning, with his seasoned eyes searching for any indication of the presence of the predator. At first, they did not have any occupants. Over the course of the day, the level of anxiety in the village continued to rise. Because of the growing amount of money they had lost, the farmers became more and more impatient, and their demands for Shadow's removal became more and more strong. Following that, on the fourth morning, one of the traps was able to hold a captive, but that was not Shadow at all. The fur of this wolf was a darker shade of grey, and it was younger and smaller than the other wolves. Shadow's calm nature stood in stark contrast to the restless and scared demeanor of this wolf, which was characterized by its snarls and snapping teeth. The wolf that had been captured was thoroughly examined by Dr. Volkov. Both of its paw prints were identical to those discovered at the kill sites. Its teeth were keen and powerful, and they were able to inflict the wounds that were observed on the sheep that had died. Based on the newly discovered information, it was clear that Shadow was not the person responsible for the attacks. When the news traveled throughout the town like wildfire, it brought with it a flood of relief for those who had defended Shadow, as well as a sense of vindication for Old Man Tiberu and Marta. On the other hand, the relief was tempered by a new concern. If this younger and more aggressive wolf was responsible for the fatalities, then it constituted a clear and present risk to the town. Even as Dr. Volkov was making preparations to move the wolf that he had trapped to a more secluded location, he became aware of something else that was located close to the trap. It was partially concealed beneath a covering of leaves when he discovered a small wooden flute that had elaborate carvings on it. Even though it was ancient and worn, the craftsmanship was of the highest quality. In close inspection, he studied the flute. It had a one-of-a-kind design, with holes spaced out in a very specific manner. A hesitant note was played by him as he placed it to his lips in an instinctive manner. The sound was eerily clear and melodic, and it had a quality that was more eerie than usual. A thought came to him all of a sudden. It was Dr. Petrova who had mentioned Old Man Tiberu's story about Ilaara's musician lover and his ability to recreate wolf howls with a melodious tone. He recalled that Dr. Petrova had mentioned this story. Could it have been that he was the owner of this flute? However, assuming this is the case, what was it doing in the vicinity of the trap where the younger wolf was caught? Dr. Volkov made the decision to imitate the peculiar howling that Shadow had been heard making at the graveyard by playing a sequence of gentle, melodic notes on the flute until he reached the desired effect. While the eerie tune was floating across the forest, an unexpected response reverberated back to the listener. His melancholy cry carried a peculiar, almost melodic tone, and it was Shadow who made the contribution. It was impossible to deny the relationship. The howls that Shadow let forth were not merely cries of sorrow. Rather, they had a melodic pattern, a haunting echo of a musical instrument from the past. As the plot developed, the twist became more intriguing. Could Ilaara's lover have also had a connection to the wolves? Shadow might have been able to learn these musical calls from him. Another degree of mystery was given to the situation by the existence of the flute in close proximity to the trap where the younger, more aggressive wolf was caught. It was possible that the flute had been placed there on purpose. Is there a relationship between the two wolves that you mentioned? Is it possible that the sound of the flute in the region was what drew the younger wolf to investigate? It was no longer a straightforward case of a bereaved wolf. The situation had gotten so much more complicated. There was a deeper, more detailed narrative that was waiting to be revealed, a story that might hold the key to understanding the unique link that exists between Aara and Shadow. The melodic howls, the mystery flute, and the appearance of a second, hostile wolf all suggested that this story was waiting to be uncovered. As the pieces of the puzzle started to come together, the tension increased. These pieces hinted to a devastating truth that was concealed beneath the surface of the sadness and anxiety that was being experienced. In the village, the finding of the flute by Dr. Volkov caused a resurgence of curiosity to spread throughout the community. When old man Tiberu saw the instrument, he gave a wistful nod to indicate that it definitely came from that place. Indeed, it was the flute that Aara's favorite musician had always carried with him, and it was a treasured possession that he had always done so. Even after he had passed away, Aara had kept it as a physical reminder of the love she had lost. However, how did it come to be located in close proximity to the trap where the younger wolf was caught? Tiberu was unable to provide an answer, and Aara had spent her final years confined to her hut and infrequently traveled further than there. The riddle became more complicated, indicating that there may be a connection between Aara's history and the events that are taking place in the present. Shadow was the subject of Dr. Volkov's concentrated attention since he was a skilled observer of animal behavior. He observed that the older wolf responded more readily to particular rhythmic patterns performed on the flute. He tilted his head and let out howls that were mellow and almost conversational in nature. This provided further support for the notion that Shadow had acquired the ability to discover a connection between these noises and favorable encounters, most likely with Aara. During this time, Dr. Petrova was investigating Aara's past in an effort to find any hints that could shed light on her peculiar relationship with the wolves or the presence of the flute in the forest. Prior to retreating into solitude, she engaged in conversations with long-lost relatives and went through ancient records, putting together pieces of Aara's life story. She came to the realization that Aara and her musician lover had resided in a modest hut located farther into the foothills of the Carpathian Mountains before to his tragic passing. It was well recognized that the region served as a natural habitat for wolves. There is a possibility that they came across wolves there. It is possible that the musician could have engaged in conversation with them, possibly even playing his flute. Tiberu recalled a local tradition that told of a wolf whisperer who had lived in the region years before. This man was claimed to have a special capacity to speak with wild beasts through music. The younger villagers had nearly forgotten about this mythology, but Tiberu recalled it. Is it possible that Aara's boyfriend was a descendant of this legendary figure? Following its relocation, the younger wolf that had been seized was the subject of observation by Dr. Volkov and his crew. The manner in which it behaved was very dissimilar to that of Shadow. It displayed typical predatory instincts and approached human presence with a sense of apprehension. Consequently, this provided additional evidence in support of the hypothesis that it was responsible for the slaughter of cattle, and that Shadow's presence in the community was motivated by something altogether else. There was a shift in emphasis from merely identifying the predator to gaining an understanding of the unusual link that existed between Aara and Shadow, as well as the possible function of the flute. Would it have been possible for Aara to continue her lover's contacts with the wolves after he had passed away? Would it have been possible for her to speak with Shadow through the flute, providing him with the opportunity to learn the melodious howls? Indeed, the prospect appeared to be more and more realistic. There was a possibility that Aara's life of isolation was not as empty of connection as everyone had perceived it to be. It is possible that Shadow looked at Aara as a substitute for a person from his past, since he was drawn to the tunes that were familiar to him and associated with kindness and possibly even a long-lost buddy. A new line of inquiry was opened up as a result of the finding of the flute, which hinted at the existence of a concealed past and a more profound connection between the human and animal worlds in this remote valley. In the beginning, the villagers were motivated by dread and distrust. However, as time went on, they began to look at Shadow with a newly discovered feeling of wonder and respect. They came to the realization that the tale of the solitary woman and the starving wolf was far more intricate and wonderful than they could have ever imagined. A stunning and wonderful fact about the enduring power of connection across species was gradually becoming apparent as the pieces of the puzzle began to slowly come together. A fragile sense of serenity was established in the community as a result of the gradually increasing comprehension of the possible connection that existed between Aara, her musician lover, the flute, and Shadow. To a considerable extent, the dread that had been around Shadow had subsided, and in its place was a communal sense of amazement and fascination. Recognizing the exceptional nature of the situation, the authorities chose a more careful and observant approach, despite the fact that they were still obligated by protocol. On the other hand, this newly acquired comprehension was put in jeopardy by an unfortunate turn of events. After hearing about the musical wolf, a group of wildlife researchers from a distant university embarked on their journey to investigate Shadow. The news reached the village that they were on their way to investigate Shadow. Concerns were expressed among the villagers, notably among Old Man Tiberu and Dr. Petrova, who thought that Shadow would be treated as a scientific curiosity, that his peace would be interrupted, and that his special link with Aara would be exploited. Tiberu spoke up angrily against any intrusive investigations, recalling Alaara's fiercely private nature and her silent relationship with Shadow. He urged that such studies should be avoided, Shadow's loss should be recognized, and any attempt to interfere with his natural conduct would be a grave disrespect to Alaara's memory, according to him. He believed that Shadow's grief should be respected with respect. It was Dr. Petrova who expressed his worries. In spite of the fact that she was captivated by the prospect of communication across other species, she was concerned about the ethical repercussions that would result from putting Shadow under scientific study. She was of the opinion that the primary concern ought to be safeguarding him and enabling him to grieve in tranquility. The researchers' vans and equipment, which were causing a disturbance in the normally peaceful ambience of the village, contributed to the escalation of the conflict. Dr. Alistair Finch, a well-known ethologist who takes a clinical and somewhat distant approach to his work, was eager to get his research project off the ground. His perception of Shadow was that it was a one-of-a-kind opportunity to learn about the intelligence and communication of animals. The villagers, who were headed by Tiberu and supported by Marta and Father Iowan, maintained their position and formed a human barrier around the cemetery, where Shadow continued his vigil. They begged Dr. Finch to show respect for Shadow's grief and to refrain from disturbing him by leaving him alone. When Dr. Finch, who was dissatisfied with the resistance of the villagers, threatened to contact the police in order to gain access to the wolf, the tension reached a boiling point. The fragile serenity that had settled over the hamlet was destroyed, and it was suddenly replaced by a new struggle. This new fight was a battle between scientific curiosity and empathetic regard for the pain of a wild creature, as well as a unique relationship between humans and animals. The growing tension and the unusual presence of the researchers caused Shadow to get irritated. Shadow was beginning to feel uncomfortable. The low growls that he let out as he emerged from Alaara's grave served as a clear warning to the intruders. A subtle pleading could be seen in his amber eyes as he turned his gaze towards the villagers. The highlight of the story was drawing near. Shadow himself, trapped in the center, held the key to an astonishing story that was still developing. The researchers were desperate to study Shadow, and the villagers were equally determined to defend him. Shadow was caught in the middle. It remained to be seen if the one-of-a-kind connection that had been established by acts of kindness would be respected, or whether it would be examined and scrutinized, which may potentially destroy the very essence of its charm. Over the course of the following several hours, the villagers will come to an understanding of the profound connection that the sad wolf felt with the lonely woman who had showed him kindness. This knowledge will determine the fate of the wolf. An increase in tension was observed at the graveyard of the village. The argument that Dr. Finch made was that the study of shadow was essential for the growth of scientific knowledge and may provide significant insights into the cognitive processes of animals. His voice was sharp and authoritative. He accused the people of being overly emotional and of preventing progress from being made. With his weak frame shaking with wrath, Old Man Tiberu rebutted the argument by stating that there were some things that were more important than scientific inquiry. It was his insistence that this creature is grieving. It was a good woman with whom he had a connection. Rest in peace, he deserves it. Marta stood next to Tiberu, never wavering in her commitment despite her young age. The soft presence of the wolf at Shadow's grave was something that she recalled, as was the quiet kindness that Aara had offered Shadow. She said, "He is not a specimen to be studied," and she meant it. As a creature, he is one who loves and is loved by others. An appeal was made to Dr. Finch's sense of humanity by Father Aara, who spoke in a voice that was soft yet authoritative. "Doctor, there is a sacredness to the experience of grief. If you were to encroach upon it in this manner, you would be showing a tremendous disrespect not only to the wolf, but also to the memory of Aara when you do so." Without showing any sign of emotion, Dr. Finch continued to concentrate only on the potential scientific discovery that Shadow represented. In order to sedate the wolf and bring him back to their study facility, he started giving his crew instructions to get the necessary equipment ready for the capture of the wolf. As soon as the locals gained an understanding of the researchers' intentions, they encircled Shadow more closely. Some of them formed a physical barrier by linking their arms. An aura of intense tension pervaded the tranquil cemetery, which had been transformed into a battlefield between the aspirations of scientific research and the compassion of the heart. As Shadow got more aware of the conflict's intensifying nature, he became increasingly angry. His low growls appeared to be directed at the researchers, who were getting closer to Aara's grave as he paced restlessly around it. As he turned his gaze toward the villagers, his eyes were filled with a fervent request for their understanding and protection. With a rising sense of dread, Dr. Volkov, who had been studying the scenario, took the initiative to go forward. He spoke to Dr. Finch in a tone that was collected but authoritative. "My advice to you, Alistair, is to rethink the strategy you are taking. This is a really extraordinary circumstance, and it requires compassion on your part. In addition to causing harm to the wolf, imposing this issue could also alienate the local people, which would make it more difficult to do any future studies in this area." Dr. Finch discounted his worries, since he was confident that the potential scientific benefits outweighed any ethical difficulties that might have been involved. This was the command that he gave to his crew. Shadow let out a series of loud, mournful howls as the researchers pushed forward, armed with nets and tranquilizer guns. His cries reverberated through the tense calm as they were heard. When it came to this particular instance, the melodic quality was much more evident, and it had a tone that was almost plaintive. During that precise instant, a choice was concluded. Old Man Tiberu, whose eyes were filled with a furious protectiveness, stood immediately in front of Shadow, his feeble body acting as a shield against the researchers. A very forceful tone could be heard in his voice as he asserted, "You will have to go through me first." Marta, along with a number of other villagers, joined him and appeared to be standing defiantly next to the weeping wolf. At this point, the confrontation had reached its zenith, a tremendous standoff between the unyielding compassion of the villagers and the researchers' unrelenting pursuit of scientific benefit. Shadow's destiny, as well as the legacy of his unique link with Aara, hung in the balance in a perilous manner. Over the course of the next few moments, it will be determined if empathy and respect will triumph, or whether the one-of-a-kind enchantment that exists between them will be destroyed in the cause of scientific inquiry. It was decided to draw the line in the graveyard. On the other side stood the resolute villagers, their features carved with a mixture of terror and intense protectiveness, and they were protecting Shadow with their bodies. On the other hand, the impatient researchers were holding their capture equipment ready, their scientific ambitions coming into conflict with the raw emotion that was present at the event. Dr. Finch argued with Tiberu. increasing the volume of his voice as he became increasingly frustrated. His face was a mask of frustration. "It is clear that you are not aware of the significance of this. This has the potential to completely transform our understanding of how animals communicate." Tiberu did not waver in commitment. "In addition, you are unable to comprehend the significance of being respectful and courteous. The sole friend that this creature had has passed away. Let him be at peace with his sorrow." In the midst of this human struggle, Shadow shuffled restlessly as it was caught in the middle. His amber eyes reflected the tumult that was going on around him as he looked from the determined faces of the locals to the researchers who made their demands. His howls were sweet and lyrical, and they seemed to convey a touch of perplexity and despair. He let out another series of howls. The forceful attitude that Dr. Finch was taking caused Dr. Volkov to become increasingly agitated, and he made one final attempt to reason with him. "Please, Alistair, give some thought to the ethical repercussions. The animal will just experience tension that is not required, and this community will become even more estranged as a result of this. There is a possibility that investigating this phenomenon can be done in other ways, approaches that are less invasive." But Dr. Finch was completely oblivious to logic, and his only concentration was on capturing Shadow. To proceed, he issued a command to his team in a straightforward manner. A deep growl came from Shadow's breast as the researchers traveled forward with their nets extended. This growl was a primitive warning that resonated with the savagery that was already there within him. Despite the fact that their hearts were pounding in their chests, the peasants held their breath. The delicate peace had been destroyed, and the situation was on the point of escalating into an unpredictable state of turmoil. Despite the fact that her hands were shaking, Marta took a step forward, just as the researchers were about to approach the line of villagers. Her voice was sharp and confident. She raised the wooden flute, which was Aara's most cherished musical instrument. As she spoke, she kept her eyes fixated on Dr. Finch and stated, "He responds to this." He was able to hear it from Aara. She attempted to imitate the melodic patterns that Shadow had been heard playing by bringing the flute to her lips with some trepidation and playing a few notes that were gentle and hesitant. In an instant, the effect was felt. Shadow immediately stopped his snarling, and his ears began to twitch. He was concentrating intently on the flute. A cautious stride was taken in the direction of Marta, and his guarded stare became slightly less adamant. The members of Dr. Finch's team paused, and a look of surprise could be seen in their eyes. It was impossible to deny the relationship. There was a response from the wolf to the music. The melody began to develop a sense of self-assurance as Marta continued to play through it. Shadow went closer to the young woman, eventually bringing his big form to within a few feet of her vicinity. With a motion that appeared less menacing and more inquisitive, he bowed his head. The level of anxiety in the cemetery became the highest it could possibly be. The conclusion of the fight between compassion and scientific desire, as well as the fate of Shadow, the culmination of his unique link with Aara, and the outcome of the conflict were all in the balance. Does the music have the potential to bring about a peaceful resolution and bridge the gap? Alternatively, would the researchers' unrelenting pursuit of knowledge destroy the delicate balance that exists? What would happen in the following few moments would be decisive. The eerie tune that Aara played on her flute lingered in the air, serving as a delicate connection between the human world and the wild world. Shadow was standing in front of Marta, his amber eyes riveted on the wooden instrument. His initial agitation had been replaced by a peaceful curiosity. As they watched, the researchers' impatience was momentarily overshadowed by their scientific curiosity. As the villagers held their breath, their hope clung to the delicate notes that were being played. Dr. Finch, whose initial mistrust was beginning to weaken, took a step forward with some hesitation. "Play more," he coaxed Marta, his voice becoming softer and laced with a sense of wonder that was just beginning to emerge. As she continued to play, Marta's fingers began to discover a beat, creating a tune that was sweet and sincere. In response, Shadow let out a few gentle whimpers, and his body began to relax slightly. It was as if the music was a key that opened a secret language, a memory of connectedness and generosity that was shared by all of the individuals. Following then, An event that was genuinely remarkable took place. The melancholy screams that Shadow had made at Aara's grave were not the same as the howls that he let out when he lifted his head and let out a succession of howls. The cries were beautiful, resonating with the notes of the flute, and they formed a wild harmony that joined Marta's straightforward tune. It was a dialogue, a response, and a demonstration of the profound and unexplainable connection that he had shared with Aara, as well as the delicate connection that he was now building with Marta while listening to the music. The locals let out a gasp, their expressions revealing awe and wonder. A genuine communication between different species was witnessed by even the most seasoned researchers, who stood in astonished silence as they witnessed something that they had only written about in their textbooks. As he neared, Dr. Finch approached with extreme caution, his scientific detachment utterly gone. The tone of his voice was filled with a mixture of amazement and wonder as he mumbled, He's responding to the music. It's likely that Aara was the one who played for him." The eyes of old man Tiberu began to brim up with tears as he nodded. His lover's music continued to live on in her, and now it is living on in him. It was not a dramatic clash that served as the climax. Rather, it was a profound moment of connection, a revelation of a language that was presented not through words, but through melodies. The tense atmosphere in the graveyard gradually subsided, and it was gradually replaced by a sense of collective awe and reverence for the extraordinary creature that stood in front of them. Dr. Volkov approached Dr. Finch and came forward to speak with him. "Alistair, I believe that we have gained knowledge that is significantly more valuable than anything that any scientific study could have discovered by the use of coercion. There is more to this than simply the communication between animals. It is also about compassion, kindness, and the surprising ties that can exist across different species." As a result of the event, Dr. Finch experienced a profound sense of humility. Everyone in the village was correct. Shadow was not a specimen that could be examined. Rather, he was a living testament to a story that was both unforgettable and breathtaking. As a sign of respect, he went so far as to lower his head, as he acknowledged, "You are correct. This is a lesson that we can take away from it." There was a resolution to the immediate conflict. Shadow's privacy and the desires of the villagers were taken into consideration when the researchers made the decision to observe him from a distance. The heartbreaking reminder of Aara's everlasting presence and the unique link that she had formed continued to be the musical howls that continued to be heard. When the climax arrived, it was not in a moment of confrontation, but rather in a moment of shared understanding. It was a harmonic denouement that acknowledged the depth and mystery of the bond that existed between a lonely woman and a starving wolf. The events that transpired in relation to Shadow and Aara's memories left an indelible mark on the tranquil community located in the foothills of the Carpathian Mountains. Shadow's musical cries and his continuous presence by Aara's grave were documented with respect and awe by the researchers, who, having been humbled by their experience, took a non-invasive approach to observing Shadow. Initially, they were interested in science, but with time, they developed a genuine appreciation for the special connection that had developed between them in their peaceful valley. Beyond the confines of the town, the tale of the solitary woman and the wolf who mourned her eventually made its way to the hearts of people all around the world. The power of basic compassion, the depth of animal feeling, and the incredible relationships that may transcend the bounds of species were all demonstrated by this event, which became a testimony to these concepts. The solitary existence of Aara, which had been seen as ordinary in the past, was now remembered for the tremendous compassion that she had shown to a wild creature. This compassion was returned in a manner that no one could have anticipated. Shadow continued to be a constant presence in the community, serving as a silent keeper of Aara's memories. In the cemetery, his melodic howls would reverberate throughout the grounds, serving as a hauntingly beautiful monument to his deceased partner. He would frequently lie down close to her grave. The villagers, who had been terrified of him in the past, now looked at him with a mixture of awe and protectiveness. They had come to the realization that he was more than just a wild beast. He was a living manifestation of an extraordinary love story. His early insight and impassioned defense of Shadow turned out to be correct, and as a result, Old Man Tiberu became a legend in the community. Through her bravery and the force of Aara's song, Marta was able to play a significant role in bridging the gap that existed between the worlds of humans and animals. The unusual instance of shadow served as the impetus for Dr. Volkov and his team to shift their study emphasis and investigate the possibility of musical communication with other animal species. The event served as a potent reminder that the natural world contains mysteries that are beyond the comprehension of humans, and that empathy and understanding can open connections that we never dreamed were conceivable. Shadow was first surrounded by fear and suspicion. However, these feelings were eventually replaced by a tremendous respect for his pain and the extensive nature of his relationship with Aara. The heartwarming tale of Aara and Shadow serves as a reminder that generosity is not limited to any particular species. Their one-of-a-kind connection, which is demonstrated by the use of uncomplicated actions such as feeding one another and the eerie melody of a love that has been lost, is a demonstration of the strength of connection in the most unforeseen of situations. Is there anything in Shadow's response to Aara's passing that you found to be the most surprising? Have you ever considered the possibility that a wild animal may establish such a profound and enduring connection? In the comments section below, please share your ideas. Those of you who were moved by this incredible story of love, grief, and understanding between different species are encouraged to subscribe to our channel so that you can watch further stories from the animal kingdom that are both touching and thought-provoking. Also, make sure you don't miss out on our next film, in which we delve into the intricate emotional lives of animals of all sizes, including those that are both large and small, and explore additional astounding examples of animal mourning and loyalty. Simply click on this link to begin watching right away and learn about the extraordinary depths of the animal heart. We are grateful that you have chosen to accompany us on this emotional journey. It is our sincere hope that it has moved you emotionally and deepened your comprehension of the connections that exist between all living beings.